Hey, welcome back to the stash. It's no secret that comics change with the times. Every decade leaves its own mark on the characters we know, reshaping them for a new generation of readers. The Silver Age gave us Spider-Man's birth, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko crafting a hero who felt painfully real, a teenager weighed down by guilt, responsibility, and all the drama of growing up. Then with the 70s came a more adult Peter Parker. He was dealing with hardships no other hero knew, fully separated him apart from the rest. The 1980s carried that foundation into darker, more complex stories, with Roger Stern, Tom DeFalco, and others expanding Peter Parker's life, while creators like J.M.D. Mateus gave us a psychological depth to stories such as Kraven's Last Hunt. But by the late 1980s, Marvel and comics in general were in a different place. The industry was growing louder, flashier, and more commercial than ever. Covers weren't just meant to sell a story anymore, they were meant to sell numbers. The collector's boom was around the corner and artists were about to become household names. And right at the center of that shift was one man, Todd McFarlane. When McFarlane first drew Spider-Man in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 298, readers knew instantly that something had changed. The massive eyes, the knotted webbing, the twisted, contorted poses, it was clear that this wasn't the Spider-Man of Romita or Andrew. This was something raw, something darker, something that felt like the Spider-Man villains or J. Jonah Jameson would see. McFarlane's run on The Amazing Spider-Man and later his solo Spider-Man title became one of the most defining eras in the character's history. It was bold, diverse, and it symbolized an entire industry transforming before our very own eyes. So today, we're looking back at that era to ask what it meant then and what it still means today. Before we do get into that though, I want to take a quick second to say that here at The Stash, we're trying to reach 16,000 subscribers before the end of the month. Now, it's a huge ask, I know, but with your help, I also know we can do it. So if you like Spidey or just comic content in general, feel free to stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. But with all that being said, let's jump right back into the video. Now, Todd McFarlane wasn't just a random newcomer when he landed on Spider-Man. Far from it, in fact. Todd had already worked his way up through DC's Infinity Incorporated and later Marvel's Incredible Hulk. It was on Hulk actually where his unique style first stood out. His anatomy was strange, his poses unconventional, and his line work was very heavy, but it had energy. And because of him, the book sales jumped, suddenly making McFarlane a name Marvel simply couldn't ignore. Still though, not everyone at the company was convinced. Editors were divided, for some thought his style was too cartoonish, too messy, or even too weird to fit a flagship hero, but readers loved it. And in comics, sales speak louder than opinions. So in 1988, Marvel made the choice that would change Spider-Man forever, putting the rising star Todd McFarlane on The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, McFarlane's very first issues of The Amazing Spider-Man were historic. In issue 298, they teased a mysterious new villain named Venom. While writer David Michelinie had been building the idea, it was McFarlane who basically brought him to life visually. Venom's hulking frame, haunting eyes, and disturbing grin all came from McFarlane's pen. To me, this is the best base for a Venom design. I'm more partial towards Bagley's look for the character, which just, in my opinion, perfectly added to this look in ways that complemented Venom. But between the two, those are the designs that my brain always go to when I think of the character. It's the best look for Venom, and I miss when he generally just wasn't considered a giant goo monster. I adore how McFarlane twisted the concept of Spider-Man's black suit into something terrifying. It felt properly distinct and almost like a dark reflection of the Wallcrawler himself. But after one more tease in issue 299 of ASM revealing Venom's haunting look, The Amazing Spider-Man issue 300 marked the comic where Venom was fully unleashed. The issue has since become one of the most famous comics of all time, with a cover that's been recreated endlessly. Naturally, Venom went on to cement himself as one of Marvel's most popular villains, and it's impossible to imagine him without McFarlane's influence. But Venom was only the start. Through his roughly 30-issue run, McFarlane drew Spider-Man through so many great storylines. There's a certain charm this small run had. The stories felt grittier, yet still well and truly in line with what Spider-Man comics should be. And the assassination plot is one that easily sticks out for me. I love the covers of that story, but also just how intense it felt at times with its themes. Now, of course, these weren't all timeless stories. Some were overstuffed and some were just pure spectacle, but with McFarlane's art, every issue felt like an event. His covers especially shined in my opinion. Ones like ASM 316 became instant classics, and soon after, back issues skyrocketed in value, and suddenly McFarlane wasn't just another artist within a long list of names, he was the artist. Now, to really understand the impact McFarlane had, you have to compare him to what came before. Ditko's Spider-Man was wiry and nervous, and he looked like a teenager in over his head. Every panel was filled with tension. Romita's senior Spider-Man was handsome, polished, and romantic, the kind of hero who could step into a soap opera without missing a beat. And then with Ross Andrew and Gil Kane's Spider-Man in the 70s, it was a solid and more dependable visual definition of the Bronze Age, and the rest, no matter how great they were, all followed a certain look for the comic. But then came McFarlane. His Spider-Man wasn't heroic in the traditional sense. He was hunched, crawling, and twisted into impossible contortions. His webbing wasn't neat. There was chaotic tangles spilling across panels. His eyes weren't small slits either. They were huge, expressive lenses that could show emotion even through a mask. McFarlane made Spider-Man look less like a man in a costume and more like a creature, almost insect-like. And that was some of the coolest issues you could ever read for Spidey. It gave the character a new energy, a new visual language that almost every artist after him borrowed from. Eric Larson, another favourite of mine, picked up where McFarlane left off, and Mark Bagley, while more traditional, kept elements of it through his time on ASM and even in Ultimate Spider-Man. Even today, video games, cartoons, and merchandise all mostly carry hints of McFarlane's influence. The man properly redefined how Spider-Man looked for generations, and by 1990, McFarlane had become Marvel's biggest star. His Amazing Spider-Man issues were selling out instantly, with fans buying them for the art alone. Marvel knew they had to keep everyone happy and capitalize on Todd's popularity, so they gave him something rare. His own Spider-Man title. Not spectacular, not Web of, simply Spider-Man. A new ongoing series that McFarlane would write and draw himself, a privilege fans could only ever dream of. Marvel promoted it like nothing else. Multiple covers, be it silver editions, gold editions, or standard editions. It was a marketing blitz that treated the book like a cultural event, and when Spider-Man issue 1 hit shelves in August 1990, it sold over 2 million copies, and some even estimate it go as high as 3 million when you count reprints and variants. It was one of the best-selling comics of all time, and a true signal of where the industry was heading. Variant covers, superstar artists, and speculation galore. And at the center of it all was Todd McFarlane. Now, the first storyline in McFarlane's new book was Torment. Running through issues 1 to 5, it pitted Spider-Man against the lizard controlled by the voodoo priestess Calypso. The story itself, when boiled down, was pretty simple. Spider-Man was being hunted and pushed to the edge, but the presentation was unlike anything fans had seen before. The narration was sparse, repetitive, and almost hypnotic, especially with that constant drum beat. That drum beat gave the arc a horror-esque atmosphere, one that for me pretty much defined the story. The art was drenched in shadows, full of close-ups of blood, teeth, and claws. It felt more like a nightmare than a superhero adventure. And so with all that, it left critics split. Some praised it as a bold and experimental, fresh way of telling a Spider-Man story, while others dismissed it as style over substance, pointing out that the plot could be summarized in a single sentence. And honestly, both views are kind of fair. I didn't think it was anything groundbreaking in terms of story, but there's something about it that still, in the end, made me enjoy reading it. I believe Torment is more about mood than narrative. It's an experience, one that showed what McFarlane mostly cared about. Not complex plots, but atmosphere, tone, and visual storytelling. Now, compared to something like Kraven's Last Hunt, which blended psychological depth with gothic visuals, Torment does feel thinner. But it's still fascinating as a statement piece. It showed us all what McFarlane's Spider-Man was in its most purest form. A dark, dangerous, relentless, and most importantly, iconic take. The tension between art and story defines the McFarlane era. On one side, you have some of the most iconic visuals in Spider-Man history, covers that still sell for hundreds of dollars, and a look that continues to influence the character to this day. But on the other side, the stories often feel lightweight. David Michelinie's scripts on The Amazing Spider-Man during that roughly 30-issue run with Todd were solid, but sometimes overshadowed by the art. Then, McFarlane's own writing on Spider-Man was diversive, atmospheric, but shallow. This was truly a reflection of the wider comics culture at the time. The early 90s were all about superstar artists. Jim Lee on X-Men, Rob Liefeld on X-Force, McFarlane on Spider-Man. The art drove sales, the stories were almost secondary. Some fans hated it, some fans loved it, but either way, it defined the industry. As I'm sure most of you know, Todd McFarlane left Marvel in 1991. Frustrated with the editorial restrictions, he joined forces with other top artists to form Image Comics, where he created Spawn. That book went on to become one of the longest running independent comics ever, and McFarlane even became a legend outside of Marvel. But his time on Spider-Man left a permanent mark. Venom, one of Marvel's most popular characters, is forever tied to McFarlane's design, not to mention he did co-create the character too. Then there's the spaghetti webbing and contorted poses that are still copied today. Even toy lines, video games, and animated series borrow his visual language. And perhaps just as importantly, McFarlane's Spider-Man issue 1 symbolized both the peak and downfall of the comics boom. Its record-breaking sales were a triumph, but also a warning. Collectors bought stacks of copies expecting them to be valuable forever, and when the market collapsed a few years later, Spider-Man issue 1 was one of the symbols of that bubble. And so for better and for worse, McFarlane defined an entire era of the comic industry. But how does McFarlane's Spider-Man hold up today? If you're looking for deeply layered, timeless stories, I don't really think this is the era you'll be looking for. In my opinion, Torment doesn't hold a candle to Kraven's Last Hunt, and stories like the assassination plot aren't remembered the way other classics of the time are either. But if you're looking for energy, for visuals that leap off the page, for a version of Spider-Man that feels alive, alien, and exciting, then McFarlane still delivers. His art hasn't aged, it's still striking, still bold, still full of personality, and that's why his run matters. It's not about perfect scripts, it's about the impact, the way a single artist could redefine a character, the way an era could be captured in the curve of a web line or the glare of an oversized eye. I know that Todd McFarlane's era of Spider-Man is remembered for a lot of its contradictions. The art was groundbreaking, the stories were uneven, the sales were record-breaking, the criticism was constant, but that's what makes it so fascinating, because every era of Spider-Man reflects something about its time. Within the early 60s, Ditko reflected the awkwardness and angst of the time. Whereas when Romita took over, he reflected more of the romance and optimism of the mid to late 60s. The 1980s also reflected darker, more serious storytelling, and McFarlane, he reflected the 90s. A decade of spectacle, of superstar artists, of comics as cultural events. A decade that would burn bright and then crash hard. So does the McFarlane era hold up today? I think it does. Not because it's flawless, but because it's unforgettable. The massive eyes, the tangled webs, the poses that defy physics, the venom that defined a generation. So while it might not be the best written Spider-Man era, it's certainly one of the most iconic, and sometimes that's enough. Spider-Man, Spider-Man,